Sarah's thoughts and desires explain her behavior in exactly the same way our thoughts and desires explain ours. The only difference is that Sarah does not yet understand that her behavior can be explained by the fact that, whether or not her father is home, she thinks he's home. We do understand that. Now, if Sarah's behavior is to be explained by what she thinks, even when she doesn't realize she thinks it, and the behavior in question is a deliberate, purposeful act, that is, Sarah has and is prepared to give reasons for what she does. And these reasons are in part what she thinks. So if Mommy asked her, why did you say Daddy was home? She'd say, because Dad, she wouldn't say, because I thought Daddy was home, because she doesn't understand what that means. She'd say, because Daddy is home. That's what she thinks. So she's prepared to give reasons for what she does, and these reasons are in part what she thinks. There must be a sense in which Sarah is aware of what she thinks, that her father is home, without being aware that this is something she thinks. Now, I'm going to call that form of awareness acquaintance. So Sarah is acquainted with what she thinks. Acquaintance is a form of awareness. Although this word, acquaintance, has a troubled philosophical history, I use it in its ordinary sense, the sense in which one can be acquainted with, in fact, good friends with, a philosopher, and not know he's a philosopher. One can be acquainted with, aware of, what was reported on the radio, that it was snowing, that it is snowing in Miami, for instance, without knowing it was reported on the radio, that someone else tells you. So you're acquainted with what was reported on the radio without realizing that it was also reported on the radio. It is in this epistemologically uncommitted sense of awareness that Sarah is acquainted with what she thinks. She is aware. That is, she's conscious of what she's thinking in a way that doesn't require her to know or even think it's something she's thinking in order to be conscious of it. If she had thought instead that it was the mailman, she would have been acquainted with, aware of, conscious of something quite different. Something different would have been going through her mind, her conscious mind, at the time she spoke to her mother. She would therefore have behaved differently. Now, what is it that Sarah is acquainted with, conscious of, when she thinks her father is home? We cannot say it is the fact that her father is home, because her father needn't be home for her to think he is home, and to behave in exactly the same way. Whatever she is acquainted with when she thinks he's home must therefore be logically independent of her father's actual whereabouts, in the same way that the thought that he's home is logically independent of his actual whereabouts. So it can't be the fact that her father is home. There may be no such fact. Nor can we say that what Sarah is acquainted with when she thinks her father is home is the fact that she thinks her father is home, because this is something she doesn't think. Sorry, got lost. I'll read that over. Nor can we say that what Sarah is acquainted with when she thinks her father is home is the fact that she thinks her father is home, because although this, unlike her father being home, must be a fact, it is not a fact that Sarah, lacking the concept of thought, can be aware of. What then, if it isn't a fact, is it that Sarah is aware of when she thinks her father is home? Well, it's what philosophers have called a proposition. Propositions are the objects of thought. In thinking that her father is home, Sarah is acquainted with a proposition. The proposition that Daddy is home. The propositions are the meanings of those declarative sentences we use to express what one thinks or says. They can be either true or false. So what Sarah is acquainted with when she thinks her father is home is neither the fact that her father is home, nor the fact that she thinks her father is home, but the proposition that he is home. And that proposition may be false. That's just a way of saying, fancy way of saying, what Sarah thinks may not be true. Given the way we're understanding acquaintance, Sarah can be acquainted with this proposition without knowing it's a proposition. In the same way she could be acquainted with a philosopher and not know he's a philosopher. Now, if acquaintance with propositions sounds a bit strange, like some piece of philosophical hocus pocus, one has to remember that it's merely my way of saying that one can be aware of or conscious of what one thinks in the same way we, who know we think, can be aware of it without knowing that it's something one thinks. It's just a way of trying to describe the situation that Sarah's in. When she's aware of what she thinks, but isn't able to classify it as something she thinks because she doesn't have the concept of thought. Indeed, one way to describe the conceptual development of children is to say that what they learn at about the age of 4 is that what they have been taking to be what we call facts about the world are really what philosophers call propositions, entities that, unlike facts, can be false. Awareness of the proposition that her father is home does not mean, of course, that Sarah cannot also be aware of the fact that he's home. But awareness of facts requires more than awareness of propositions. It requires, in addition, awareness of the proposition that her father is home is true. All right, so there's a sense, a perfectly straightforward sense, in which one has a privileged awareness of one's own present conscious thoughts, even before one knows one has them. If we want to find out what Sarah thinks, Sarah is the authority about this. We have to ask her. She's the authority on what she thinks, despite not knowing she's thinking it. We cannot, to be sure, find out what Sarah thinks by asking her, what do you think? She won't understand what we're talking about. But there are indirect ways of getting the answer to this question. Given a cooperative child, we can ask Sarah whether her father is home, or why she's rushing to open the door. The answers will reveal quite unerringly what Sarah thinks. If Sarah wasn't aware of what she thinks, how could she know, and know furthermore with an obvious authority, the answers to these questions? Now, what this tells us is that the point of contact with our own thoughts is through their content, what it is we're thinking. We have a privileged and exclusive access to our own thoughts through acquaintance with their propositional contents. This mode of access gives our own acts of thought their peculiar diaphanous quality. The acts of thought are absolutely invisible to the person whose thoughts they are. Right now, you know what you're thinking, but you're not aware of the act of thinking. All one is aware of, at least up to the age of 3 or 4, is the content. Later, one becomes aware of the fact that this is the content of one's own thought. Something of this puzzling nature can perhaps be brought out by comparing thoughts, one's own thoughts, to verbal representations. People say things and they think things. One's access to what a person, and I mean to be including yourself, what a person says is through the person's act of saying it, an acoustic or observable event of some sort. We hear the person say he has a dental appointment, and then if we understand the language, we come to know, we become aware of what the person said, the proposition expressed. We go from saying to what is said, from act to content. In the case of thought, however, the route of access is